So welcome on behalf of ISMETA, the International Somatic Movement Education and Therapy Association. My name is Elizabeth Osgood Campbell. I am the Assistant Director of ISMETA currently, and it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome all of you and Dr. Rae Johnson to speak about their book, Embodied Activism. I have a copy here with me. It has a beautiful cover. Embodied Activism, Engaging the Body to Cultivate Liberation, Justice, and Authentic Connection. Rae Johnson is a social worker, somatic movement therapist, and scholar activist working at the intersections of embodiment and social justice. Rae's approach to embodied activism has been shaped by decades of frontline work with street youth, women in addiction recovery, psychiatric survivors, and members of the queer community. Since completing their doctoral studies, Rae has held academic positions in several somatic psychology graduate programs, including at Naropa University and Pacifica Graduate Institute. They currently teach somatic psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies and co-direct an online certificate program in embodied social justice. Welcome, Rae. Thank you so much for joining us to share highlights and key learnings from your new book.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for organizing this event and putting it together. I'm always excited to participate in events that ISMETA is hosting and to connect with a group of somatic movement therapists and educators as my colleagues. So I'm looking forward to hanging out together for the next hour or so and delving a little deeper into some of the material that I've prepared for today's session. It's nice to see some familiar faces as well. I'm hoping that we will have the opportunity not just to gather some information from the book, but also to have conversations with one another. So I'm looking forward to that. I've tentatively titled this talk 5 strategies somatic movement therapists and educators can use to support social justice in their practice. Because even though the book Embodied Activism is really designed for a very broad audience rather than a professional audience, I thought it might be useful to tailor some of the material in the book and to have conversations with you all about how this material can be taken up in ways that actually not only give you ideas and strategies for engaging in embodied activism in your own lives, but also how you can use this as a way to cultivate a more activist stance in your own practice. And I say that in the full recognition that I think it's true for many professions, somatic movement therapy, somatic movement education, psychotherapy more generally, that we tend not to think of ourselves as doing activist work or social justice work. And I'm going to make the argument that I think we can and should without stepping outside our scope of practice. So I'm hoping that this will be an opportunity to begin to not wear a different hat in terms of our professional work, but make our hat a little bigger. Yeah, okay. So here's the agenda. I want to spend a little bit of time introducing embodied activism. And to do that, I actually want to read from an excerpt from the introduction. And then I want to introduce 5 strategies that I'm going to suggest can help support the incorporation of an activist stance and activist understanding into the work that you do with yourself and in your own body, but also the work that you do with clients as a somatic professional. And those 5 strategies are, and I'm going to talk about them, and we will talk about them in more detail as we go along. The first strategy is recognizing the importance of the client's body story, their embodied narrative, in the context of marginalized social identities and locations. So I want to spend some time talking about body stories, and I'm going to read you one to give you an example. The second of the 5 strategies is supporting clients in cultivating their sensual capacities as a form of resistance. And I know that as somatic movement professionals, you're all really already well-versed in the value of cultivating interoception, proprioception, exteroception as a way to broaden and enhance our own and our clients' experience of being alive. But I also want to introduce this idea that this cultivation of sensual capacities can be understood and experienced as a form of resistance to oppressive political systems. The third strategy is interrogating the nonverbal communication that you exchange with your client that's going on all the time when you're working with clients, and begin to unpack a little bit some of those movements, postures, gestures, and uses of interpersonal space for potential implicit bias and for power dynamics. The fourth strategy is supporting clients to reclaim their body image against oppressive social body norms. And then the last strategy is cultivating what I call an intercorporeal ethos. And I'll say more about what I mean by that as we go along. All right. I'm going to just shift my view, even though I know Elizabeth has me spotlighted so that it looks big on the screen. I like to see all of your faces, so I shifted it so that I can see you in gallery view. As I imagine is true for all of you, the nonverbal interactions between us are really key to, well, to be honest, how good a time I'm having. Right? And so that helps to be able to see your faces and feel a little bit more engaged with you as we go along. All right, so I want to start by reading a poem. And the way I read poems is not just an invitation to hear the words, but to notice how the words land in your body. And I'm going to read the poem twice because I find that the first time it gives us an opportunity to just sort of take it in. And then the second time, sometimes it also invites us to notice particular things that we may not have heard before, may not have landed before. So I want to read this one 2 times. It's called Patterns in the Flesh. Many of us are in the kind of existential pain that Douglas Adams once described as the long, dark tea time of the soul. Icebergs melt and wildfires blaze. Violence escalates, viruses replicate. Lifelong advocates for social and environmental justice speak in terms of hospice care for the species and the planet. With the world simultaneously burning and drowning, it might seem like nothing we do will matter very much in the end. But what if nothing could be further from the truth? What if it's not only what matters in the end, but what matters in the spacious now, here, in the short arc of history? Not just the what, but the how, not just the big picture, but noticing that the big picture is created by patterns on the small scale in the warmth of our flesh. All right, so maybe just take a breath and notice how that is settling or responding or not. If there are places where, I don't know how I feel about that, or places where your body's going, not sure how I want to take that in. Just allow that to happen. And then I'll read it again, just in case there's something on this second pass that is available to you that wasn't present for you in the first time around. Okay, it's called Patterns in the Flesh. Many of us are in the kind of existential pain that Douglas Adams once described as the long, dark tea time of the soul. Icebergs melt and wildfires blaze. Violence escalates. Viruses replicate. Lifelong activists for social and environmental justice speak in terms of hospice care for the species and the planet. With the world simultaneously burning and drowning, it might seem like nothing we do will matter very much in the end. But what if nothing could be further from the truth? What if it's not only what matters in the end, but what matters in the spacious now, here, in the short arc of history? Not just the what, but the how, not just the big picture, but noticing that the big picture is created by patterns on the small scale in the warmth of our flesh. All right. So hopefully just maybe a little bit more embodied way to start us off and for me to introduce what is embodied activism. And I want to actually read a little bit directly from the book as a way to introduce the topic of embodied activism, what it is, how I understand it, how I describe it. But hopefully also in the reading of this passage, it will give you a flavor of the language and the material in the book itself. All right, so as current social conditions put an increasing strain on our collective and physical and mental health, it can be difficult for somatic movement therapists to know how to engage with clients in ways that help to change the social systems at the root of so much of our shared distress. How do we harness our skills to see beyond the personal and into the cultural trauma, intolerance, and injustice that so many of our clients experience? How can we enlist our work in support of liberation and justice? For many of us, the amount of sustained effort required for real change may feel unsupportable, and the benefits intangible or easily eroded. How do we find the footholds to leverage our actions so that we make a meaningful difference in the world? Where are the handholds to engage with others in ways that don't inadvertently perpetuate misunderstanding or marginalization? Is there a way to stay centered and grounded as we take on overwhelmingly complex issues and navigate charged relational territories across entrenched social differences? I'm going to argue that part of the challenge stems from how many of us have been taught to understand social change. That is, that it mostly occurs at the levels of laws and institutions and is largely undertaken by politicians, lobbyists, and professional activists. This book introduces a very different approach to social change, one that focuses on how politics are embedded in our everyday experiences and enacted through our relationships with others. And instead of thinking about social justice as a process that starts with changing people's minds, this approach understands our bodies, how we feel in them, and how we relate to others through them as a crucial site of transformative intervention. Embodied activism offers a radical revisioning of activism that places our everyday embodied experience of power relations at the center of our change efforts. Drawing on the intersecting dimensions of somatics and social justice work, this book articulates the importance of bringing the political into the often highly personal space of somatic work. It offers a roadmap for helping clients explore and transform the political realities of their everyday experience by harnessing the felt experience of their bodies. From listening to our body language and questioning body image norms to reconnecting with our sensual capacities, this book provides 5 practical strategies for supporting social justice in the context of somatic movement therapy practice. All right. So with that brief introduction, I want to invite us into some conversation. And in particular, I thought it would be interesting to reflect on and to talk about a couple of things, because I acknowledge that each and every one of you is bringing your own experience of these issues. You've come to this book talk because there's something about this material that is intriguing to you or exciting to you, probably commitments that you've already made based on experiences you've already had around the lived experience of the body and the power dynamics of the social world. So I want to give us an opportunity to actually have conversations about where we're coming from in relation to all of that. And I want to frame those conversations in 2 ways. One is this notion of experiences of something that I describe as disembodied politics. And by that, I mean, I want to invite you, if you've had them, on any experience of being engaged in social or environmental justice work and realizing that the body was missing for you, right? So you've done some organizing, you've done some community work, you've been involved in movement and social change work, but you realize there's something about the work that we're doing together here in this activism that is missing the body. And so I'd invite you to consider, how did that affect your understanding of activism and what it was? And how did it affect your ideas about how sustainable that work was? And what was the impact of your involvement in social justice work on your own bodily experience? How did your body fare? Yeah, in those experiences. So that's one piece. Is I'd like to invite us into a conversation and some reflection on, what does disembodied politics feel like? Yeah. But then the second piece is depoliticized embodiment, right? It's really the flip side for me. So I'd like to invite you to reflect on experiences that you might have had of doing somatic work or embodiment work or movement work. And this can be as a client or as a student or a trainee or a practitioner. And realizing that the somatic work that you were doing was missing a political dimension. Yeah. And I'd invite you to ask yourself, how did the lack of a social power analysis and praxis affect your ability to explore, understand, and transform your embodied experience? How did the lack of that political dimension affect your ability to really work with and transform your embodied experience? I'd also invite you to be curious about whether you were able to take what was valuable from that somatic work despite the lack of what I might call critical consciousness. Yeah. Okay. So these are the two territories. I'm going to assume that even if you haven't had experience of both disembodied politics and depoliticized embodiment, you've got some Velcro for one of those pieces. And so what I'd like to do is invite us into some conversation in breakout rooms for about 10 minutes or so. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Elizabeth, you've got some requests for breakout room affinity groups from.
I have not received any requests.
All
so
right.
I will do random.
Three of 3 people each?
Exactly.
Perfect. So take a couple of minutes at the beginning of the breakout session just to say hi to one another and introduce yourselves, get to know each other a little bit, and then taking turns, maybe just 3 or 4 minutes each, talk about either, and if there's time, both, your experience of disembodied politics or depoliticized embodiment, and we'll come back. Let's come back in about 15 minutes. Yeah.
Great. So, Rae, you've been invited into a room. Of course, you can just disregard that invitation.
I will. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
You're welcome. So I'll let you know when there are about 5 minutes left.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I think I can, I think I should pause the recording.
You might as well, because it'll just be recording you and I.
Right. Okay, so, Maria Luisa, are you joining your breakout room? Otherwise, EE is by himself, I think.
Let's
see.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I would love to hear from some of you a little bit about how those conversations went and anything perhaps that you learned or you found intriguing or surprised you about the discussion that you had. And Elizabeth, I'm assuming that they can unmute themselves. Is that true?
I believe that's true.
Okay.
Let me know if you have trouble through the, I will make sure the chat is enabled and if anyone has trouble. Okay.
I'm guessing you talked about something.
This is Victoria.
Hey,
And
Victoria. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
Yeah.
We went a lot of different directions in that short time.
Yeah.
The one piece for me, takeaway and interested how this is going to be reflected in your book is recognizing, I mean, maybe anywhere, but especially here in mid-Missouri, choosing to be a somatic movement practitioner and to commit my life to embody, like feeling, sensing, being aware, and supporting others to do that is a radical act. Is it self-activism?
It's already political.
And then also figuring out how to keep all that balanced and do what people think as more like when they think of activism, like being part of organizations and being part of protests and conversations and remembering, trying to figure out that dynamic, but really remembering that this core is we're already activists in what we've chosen.
Yeah. Thanks, Victoria. I think it's such an important recognition. The way in which, particularly Western, but in my research, I would extend it even beyond just Western colonial social systems, how disembodiment is actually a very strategic ideological requirement. right? That to keep us disconnected from the visceral felt sense of our bodies, and by extension, to some extent, our emotions, that actually helps to support and ensure compliance to the system, right? So that that disembodiment is actually really strategic.
I shared that it's been about 20 years ago, but I was part of the peace movement here in town until the leader made it very, very clear that anger was not allowed or appropriate in the peace movement.
They conflated anger with violence.
I didn't know how to process that.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think that's one of the ways that disembodied politics can go sideways, can become ineffective and unsustainable. Yeah. Thanks, Victoria. Thank you for that. Who else?
I think something that came up again with our group, which I was also with Victoria, but the self-care involved in being an activist, in being a somatic movement educator, and that politicizing of doing, and the lack of value in resting and being. And embodiment for me, in my experience, takes time. I have to be present, and being present means coming into myself and letting go of some of the doing. And so just that whole idea of self-care and the politics of self-care it's not part of our conditioning, for sure.
Right. Thanks, Mary. And, I think this is still true, even though folks have been saying this for decades. I mean, Audre Lorde talked about self-care as a radical act and how crucial it was to the activism work that she did. And that was decades ago. And still, there are ways in which I'm actually going to reference Audre Lorde again and her description of the master's tools and how the master's tools will never take apart the master's house. And yet how often the master's tools come into movements and practices that are designed, we think, are going to be dismantling the master's house, and yet these ideologies of productivity and self-worth based on productivity and time pressure, rather than the luxuriousness of time needed to actually feel our way through things and to feel our way through things together. Yeah. And so thank you for saying that, Mary, because I think that to do activism from an embodied perspective necessarily means attending in a way that is not going to meet those pressures for this is urgent, we have to do it now, and we have to work until it's done. It's not going to look like that. Doesn't mean that we don't have perseverance and sustainability, but it means that I think in many of the activities that we engage in, those activities are going to be slower and more relationally oriented, if that makes sense. That being so incredibly goal focused in some activist spaces actually means that we're not process focused and we're not relationship focused. And so we lose that, and then things fall apart. Yeah, they're not sustainable. Anything else folks want to add? Marco, yeah.
Yeah, well, what came alive for me just thinking of coming here registering to come here, coming here, showing up. I really appreciated the points that you brought forward so much. I just love naming things that I'm sure many of us feel in different ways, giving it a name, giving it an anchor that enables us to explore it more deeply. But I have a more primordial thing that I'd like to share, which is whether I'm the client or whether I'm the program director or the therapist, the athletic therapist, movement therapist, just being alive in the place where I live. It's so much of my the activism that I would like to unpack more is cultivating the feeling of safety. And I was asking myself, I think there are many layers to it, and I think all of the material you have presented are ways that we can explore it from different perspectives and develop other strategies or wisdom about it. But one of the things that I was thinking of is just what I've experienced, as a person of a minority, visible minority, is it's something about how space is held. And I think that has to do a lot with what you mentioned about, I think it was the third point of the 5 strategies that you mentioned about like our gestures. But there was just something really mammalian that comes out and, can be triggered by even things that are just based on past experiences and not what's really happening now. And yet, I think the other really less obvious piece of this is that I embody I have the same tendencies in me being brought up in this North American culture, even though I'm a minority, but I still have embodied my own practice and my own survival mechanisms that enable me to survive and thrive and succeed in my path, which was essential to my ancestors and to my people. That was one thing I was born to do, was to do my best and survive. And so I think this is that's a really tricky thing, because I feel just getting through this first one is so much. But a lot of my I loved the poem, what was it? Existential Pain. The existential pain showed up just thinking about meeting today, and yet I was so happy to be here. But it's always there. It's always there. And I think all of us, I don't need to make an exception of myself. I'm sure every one of us who's alive, living in this world right now, has that feeling. And so yeah, so those are the layers I wanted to bring to the table, and I thank you for this material. I'm going to really enjoy working with it.
Thank you. Yes. So much of what you've shared really resonates and starts to, as you say, unpack and identify some of the really multi-layered facets of this work. And I think it's not really possible to engage in the work of embodied activism to come into spaces where there's both an historical charge that we're walking in with, that this space is, one we're already scanning for threat because of past experiences, that safety is something that needs to be cultivated. It can't be assumed because of who we are and where we're coming from, and the histories and our ancestors' histories that we bring. That so much of that needs to happen, and I think in some ways it means that the work really in so many ways needs to be done relationally. It's so hard to do this on our own, right? And it can make such a difference when the complex work that we're doing of unraveling our own body stories, like actually taking into account what happened to me and what's happened to my body, and how has my body been shaped by my life experiences, being raised in spaces, some of which were affirming to my identity, and some of which were inherently toxic and destructive of my identities, right? So unraveling my body story and cultivating my own sensual capacities in an environment where in some cases that's actually not particularly safe to do, right? And walking into spaces where the nonverbal dynamics are so laden with invisible power dynamics based on who we are and who else is in the room, that it can feel as though we are being almost constantly exposed to what I call relational paper cuts, right? And that those little paper cuts, the little microaggressions that just enact sort of this ongoing injury that is hard to pinpoint and hard for other people to see unless they know to be looking for it. But how much of that gets enacted through the ways in which we navigate interpersonal space. And, you know, who stands where in a room, and who makes eye contact, and how, and for how long, and who looks down, and who cedes space, gives up space when someone else walks by, and who gets to touch. And is that okay? And does the touch get reciprocated? So I'm giving you all of these examples, not to try to be exhaustive about, you know, all of the things that go into this, but just to note what I think you're saying, Mariko, is that there's so much going on as we walk into a room, or as we enter into an interaction with a group of people, even if we share the same goals and our intentions are good, that it's never as simple as, oh, okay, let's just all be in our bodies and work together for some greater social good. It's never that easy. It requires so much attention and metabolic energy, and I'm going to argue support, that it makes it so much easier to do this work when we're not doing it alone, when we have some folks, not who are helping us, not who, you know, I actually, and I might be alone here, there might be folks who disagree with this, and that's okay, but I'm actually increasingly having a difficult time with the term ally. And part of the reason that I have a little bit of a difficult time with the term ally is that it's got this implication in it of, I'm in a position of power and privilege, and so I'm going to help you. And I'm very suspicious of help in that way. And I often like to quote Lilla Watson, and so I'll share that with you. She says, if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. And this might be a way to weave in what I mentioned earlier about an intercorporeal ethos, right? That I think, as far as I can tell, the only way to do the work of social change sustainably and in a way that recognizes the multiple experiences of discrimination and prejudice and harm that happen across all kinds of different social groups. I think the only way to do that sustainably is to recognize that my liberation is bound up with yours. I'm not helping you, you're not helping me. We're working together sometimes on one thing, sometimes on another. But everything that we work on, every example in our lives where we recognize that there's a power imbalance that's inequitable and unfair. That when we feel that in our bodies, we work together regardless of how it's manifesting and who it ostensibly is affecting. Because I'm going to argue it always affects all of us. That whenever that occurs, all of us, including people who hold privilege and power, lose something in terms of our humanity. Yeah. Anyway, that was a whole long riff that I wasn't planning on. But Mariko, your comments were so generative in terms of all that you brought. So thank you for that. We've got only about 25 minutes left, and Elizabeth, do I need to give you some of that time in order to do some wrapping up? Do you want 5 minutes at the end?
Maximum, yes, please.
Maximum 5? Got it. I can do maximum 5. I'd like to I'm going to make some choices now about where we go, because we won't have time to cover all of those excuse me, all of those 5 strategies. I always bring more than I can possibly do. So I'm gonna be a little bit strategic here, and invite us into another experiential. Just because this is a nice small group, and I think it's great to have some lived experience and some conversation. So I want to spend a little bit of time just saying a little bit more than what I had earlier about cultivating sensual capacities as a form of resourcing and resistance. And so I mentioned earlier in response to Victoria's comments, how much just making the choice to live in a way that's connected to my felt embodied experience in and of itself is a form of resistance. But I want to offer a small exercise that I'm sure, given who's in the room, this will be something that for most of you, I think, will be very familiar. But I'd like to offer it in the spirit of perhaps engaging in this exercise, even though it will be something that you've done before, but with the question mark included of how do my preferences around the channels of the lived experience of my body, how might those preferences be shaped by my own history and my own socialization into particular identities or roles or communities? Okay, so I'll describe this, and this is something that we'll do for, I don't know, 5 or 7 minutes, just a little short experiential. But I want to walk us through interoception, proprioception, and exteroception, and then finish with a little bit of intercorporeality. All right. So we'll do those. Go ahead, Mary. You got a question?
Could you just say the question again? How do my preferences around the channels?
Mm-hmm. How might my preferences around those 4 channels have been shaped by my socialization? Because I think we're used to taking up our own preferences as like, oh, that's just me as an individual. That's kind of how I'm wired, or, maybe my own personal history, my own family history. But I think, tend not to go much farther than that in terms of looking at where did this come from? How was I shaped in this way? And I just want to invite us into maybe there's the social and the cultural and the political that's also shaping our preference.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to start us with interoception and then work our way out. So just take a moment if you'd like, follow along to the extent that you want to, but if you'd like to try this, just take a moment, take a breath. Yeah, settled into your chair. And as you breathe, as you settle in and feel your hips and your legs on the back of your chair, maybe feeling into your feet on the ground. Just allow the sensation of your breath and the feeling of your body in relation to gravity. Allow those sensations to bring your attention and your awareness inward. Just dipping in a little bit into what's happening for you on a body level. You can explore what's happening inside however you'd like, noticing places that maybe have a lot of energy or particular temperature. Might be places that feel stiff or tense, places that feel a little numb. Perhaps places inside that feel particularly awake and alive. Just noticing those sensations without judgment, without needing to fix them or change them. And as you dip into your internal felt sense of your body, you may also become aware of little impulses to move. In fact, you may already be moving, and that's just fine. But as you notice those impulses to move that emerge from the inner felt sense of your body, just give yourself a little bit of extra room and space to follow those impulses. And to feel into the sensation of moving. Not only what movement wants to happen, and letting that movement emerge as it wants to emerge, but feeling the sensation of the movement as well. Yeah. Movements can be small, big. They can be movements that happen just in a particular place in your body or all through whole body movements. But as you continue to feel your movement and allow movement impulses to emerge, I'd also like you to begin to be aware of the room that you're in, the space that you're in. And one of the ways to do that is to just let your eyes crack open a little bit with a nice soft gaze, so that you're adding the visual field to the movement that you're doing. Adding exteroception to the interoception and proprioception. Yeah. And then allow your soft gaze to travel through the room and to draw your movement with it as a way to begin to take your movement impulses out into the room, guided by what your eye is drawn to. Allowing your movement impulses to extend out into space, allowing yourself to look through the room, noticing the colors, the shapes, the textures of the space around you. Staying connected to your movement impulses, but also adding, what draws me based on what I see? And then adding into your experience also what you're hearing. What sounds, what ambient sound is in the room? And how does that affect your embodied experience? The sound that's present. Maybe seeing if there's a smell. Taking a breath, and is there a scent in the air that you're aware of? And then last, adding on texture. As your eye draws your movement to different places in the room, are there particular textures in the room? Perhaps the feeling of a cool, smooth wall, or the nubby texture of some fabric. Noticing textures of wood or glass. Allowing yourself to notice all of the sensory dimensions that you can encounter your space through. And then when you're ready, I'd like to invite you just gradually, slowly, making your way back to your seat and to the screen. And as you do that, just really in your own time, notice that in this exploration that you've done of your own internal landscape, your own internal sensorium, and the sensory experience of your movement and the room that you're in, you're also with us. That this experience that you're having also includes a relational dimension. Yeah. Okay. Maybe just take a nice breath or two just to help finish and settle. And so ordinarily, I would give us lots of time in a breakout room and have a conversation about what that was like. But in the interest of time, and because we are a small enough group, what I'd like to do is just invite you to reflect on what channels did I prefer? Which of those experiences felt really easy and comfortable to me? And which of those channels maybe felt a little less comfortable, a little harder to access, or not my preferred channel of experiencing embodied experience? And again, this is perhaps something that you've already thought about before, already reflected on, or even had a conversation with other people around, given your somatic training. But this time, I'd like to invite you to consider, are my preferences shaped by how I was socialized or some of the experiences that I've lived through as a member of the particular social worlds that I encounter and that I'm embedded in? That makes sense, that question? Okay. Because I think this is where the intimacy of embodied experience actually begins to be, I mean, it always is, I think, shaped by the political, but it's in asking these questions that I think we begin to see all of the ways in which our socialization actually gets very deeply embedded into our bodies. Yeah? Okay. So we have a little bit of time left before I give Elizabeth the last 5 minutes. I would love to hear from some of you if you have thoughts or even just curiosities or questions about that piece that we just. And you can just go ahead and unmute.
My movement was feeling, the feeling in my body was, again, that sadness, incredible sadness and grief came. And my movement was just total unleashed sobbing. And then it was like an animal. It's very liberating and empowering. And then when I opened up to take in the room and smell and taste, I had half a salad that I had made before the meeting, and I was started munching that down like a very hungry rabbit.
Wow. Thank you. It sounds like you went to some very deep and important places in that small amount of time.
What was that poem? Extended tea? What was that?
Long dark tea time of the soul.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's, I think it's so crucial to recognize that even if we may feel, some of us, as though we're just waking up to this work of social justice, we've been living in this since the moment we were born, right? This is a long, long, deeply embedded process that we're in. Hey, Lisa, yeah.
Yes. Thank you for that. It was really lovely to be guided, and I was particularly struck by, or particularly interested in, as we're exploring the interoceptive experience or beingness, and then as my attention would come to just below the skin surface or to the skin, and that relationship, or even you know, the as we're sitting, and we often guide to go into the inner experience about our relationship to the chair and the space we're on, and then we dive in from there. But I was particularly interested in playing with that subtlety of the minutia of the layer between what would be considered the inner and the introspective, interoceptive and exteroceptive.
Yes.
So that was particularly interesting to me. And then I got a little intellectual, because when you were saying the eyes, and then as you drew us from the eyes to the ears and the certain senses to engage exteroceptively, and then so this intellectual part of me was like, yeah, and that kind of in the way that developmentally, you know, being drawn, the eyes drawing us to something, and then for movement, developmental movement, to evolve out of the eyes. So I was particularly struck by that versus the skin necessarily. And maybe it is the skin, or it's both. It's both and. So that was a really lovely exploration that was that inner. And then I also, it's then you were speaking on someone else's comment about how our preferences may have been shaped by our experiences, and having lived in the somatic movement field for my entire adult life,
Yes.
how that initial being drawn to the somatic movement field because of my preferences. So that's something that's going to take a lot of time to unpack, but that's, you know, it's this back and forth action of, it's iterative of what initially inspired us to, or initially brought us to a place of safety or preference for which channel, and then how our lives unfolded, really amplifying that. And then, you know, here we are today in this whole world. So thank you very much, because there's a lot to chew on there.
Yeah. Thanks, Elisa, for making note of the fact that as somatic movement practitioners, our preferences may have drawn us and changed how we are in our bodies, and perhaps cultivated channels that weren't necessarily available to us before, because we've had the opportunity to do a lot of work to cultivate those capacities. But that if we look to what drew us, that there may be some useful information there about who am I in this world, and how have my identities shaped how I am in the world, and what role did that play in me choosing somatics in my life. Yeah. So thanks for that, Elisa. It's a good question. Do we have time for one more, Elizabeth? Okay, one more for if there is one.
I'll say something.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. You know, being drawn to somatics just makes sense, because we're all trying to find strategies to live in this life, to live in our bodies, and to be in the present moment. And so if we're looking for those strategies, and I'm excited to look for the strategies in your book too, you know, then we have choice.
Yes.
And if we can figure out what these strategies are, study them, research them, be geeks about them, then we have so much choice. And you know, that's so powerful right there, to have choices, you know, to have more than one choice. And speaking about relational, it's so relational. And sometimes it's hard to explain to people how somatics, which can be so interoceptive,
Yeah.
affect the community or affects the whole world or the environment. How does that connect? But, of course it makes sense for us. But in terms of relational, working with others, having that support that you've been saying, Rae, to me, it's collaboration.
Yes.
Because then the collaborators have to be in their present moment and have an understanding of values. And then the process is more than just from one. It's like this process, but it is present moment in the participants.
Yes.
So thank you.
Yeah.
I got that from you.
It's a lived present moment embodied experience of being with one another in a way that is boundaried and intimate and collaborative. Yeah. If you get the book, have a particular look at the interview that I did with 3 graduate students who are using focusing relationally to look at issues of racism and sexism. They're doing remarkable stuff and talking about it in really interesting ways. And for me, that was such a great example of, oh, this is how we collaborate deeply somatically. Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. All right, Elizabeth. So I took all the time except for 1 minute, but sorry about that. I just wanted to have this last little piece.
Absolutely. I did too. I was right there in that sensing of wanting to let this come to a pausing place organically and hearing from that third voice. Thank you. And speaking of your book, I wonder if you would say a sentence or two about where people can find it. Are you directing people to specific sources?
Not particularly. You can find it anywhere. It's available for pre-order now, but it comes out next Tuesday. So you can order it directly through the website, through Penguin Random House, through the publisher, or anywhere else you like to buy books.
Is there a link to it from your website?
There is. I figured out how to do that and I made a link. So if you go to my website, which is raejohnsonsomatic.com, you look up at the top of the menu and there's a link called Embodied Activism. I actually even think it says new book, Embodied Activism. You click on that link and it'll take you.
Is there any chance it might come out as an audiobook with you narrating?
It is.
It is an audiobook.
They've done an audiobook.
Fabulous.
Yeah, with a really good narrator.
Okay.
The narrator is just, oh my God, she makes the opening poem, which I read to you all, that's how the book opens. She just did a bang up job. Yeah.
And if I might add, the book is available on the ISMETA bookstore.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
For 20% off.
Yes, it is. Because the ISMETA bookstore gives a discount to ISMETA members. And so we as soon as we heard the book was coming out, we started engaging with the publisher. So yes.
Great. Rae, thank you so very much for your vitally important work on embodied activism and beginning to shift from sort of conventional idea and model for social activism into this, what you call micro-sociological, right, framework for social change that opens the possibility for us in the field of somatic movement, education, and therapy to make those connections, to keep building those bridges within ourselves so that, and among ourselves, so that somatics does not have to be depoliticized.
Right.
Where we can evolve into, grow into the truth that somatics are politicized, and we can, within our scope of practice, I loved how you said that in the beginning. Thank you. That within our scope of practice,
yes,
we can take these actions, these micro interventions, micro activism, and perhaps further as well as the ripples move out. It's just a beginning, I feel. We're just scratching the surface here, and you are guiding, offering such important resources as we embark on this. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining me with Elizabeth and Elisa in this conversation. It was so nice to have a nice small group where we can all just kind of hang out together and do work that it's harder to do in a larger group. So I'm really appreciating that. And please do reach out if you need to. You can reach me through my website. And I think many of you actually already have my email address, but I would love to be in conversation. This thing about collaboration in mutual embodied presence is so crucial. So the more of us supporting each other in this work, the better.
Beautiful. And I'd love to say to anyone watching the video as well, we have an equity, justice, and accessibility book and practice group that's been going for the past few years. We started with My Grandmother's Hands. We are now approaching the end of Stacey Haynes' book about generative somatics, The Politics of Trauma. We're finishing up in June. We may take July off, but this book practice group will continue. We'll be opening to new members. And my hope and my wish is that this is our new text. It's a group decision. I don't get to declare that, but
Right.
this will be a top contender. So if anyone wants to join that book practice group, please contact me at ISMETA. My email, I put in the chat, it's e.osgoodcampbell, no spaces, at ismeta.org. Here's to continuing this important conversation. Thank you. Thank you.
Take good care, everyone. Bye for now.